Hello, welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranston. I had a chance to catch up with Steve Minton, who heads up the Office of Major Projects at MDOT, but has also been in a role as the project manager for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. This was started a few years ago thanks to federal money doled out to several states, and it was his job to get that money into use quickly, working with contractors and a lot of people who were new to the industry of building electric vehicle chargers and faced a lot of challenges along the way. But Steve and his team have been steadfast in their commitment and their work to get things done, and they've made a lot of progress the last few years, and I thought it would be interesting to hear from him since we last spoke back in March of 2024 about where things stand and how they're going. He has a lot of good things to say and a lot of insights about what goes into managing this kind of program. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Once again, here to talk about NEVI. And as I mentioned in the intro, we've made some progress, although like all the states involved in this program, there are a lot of challenges. And I know that people are frustrated, especially EV drivers who are very eager to have a full service grid and not have any range anxiety. And I know that's your goal and that's your team's goal. So Steve, let's start from scratch and go over some of the things we've talked about before. Can you kind of trace the history of the money coming through in the IIJA and how it filters down to Michigan and explain the program?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, it was part of IIJA or bill, and which was, I believe, enacted in late 2022.
That's right.
MDOT started working, from there and working with Eagle, kind of partnering with them on, how would we stand up the program and work towards, using the funding, and worked with the federal government a little bit too in terms of, how we would proceed with contracting and those kind of, getting the funding out in a way that makes sense. So I came involved in about, let's say mid 2023, and then started moving ahead with developing a contract process that would allow us to select in a best value manner interested companies through a request for proposals, and that were, go through some level of qualification as we evaluate kind of their ability to put these chargers in the ground. And then we move towards what's called a design, build, operate, maintain contract, where they do the design of the site, they construct the site, and then they operate and maintain the site. A key component of the contract is that there's a 5-year O&M requirement, or operations and maintenance requirement. And so we did our initial, what we called round one solicitation. We made selections. We announced those selections in 2024, February of 24. Started working on bringing those companies into the under contract and getting them to begin on their installation or design and installation process. So we had those, in process, and then we then obligated another round of funding for round two later in, I think it was in 2024, and started that selection process. And same thing, we selected companies and through that process and announced that in 2025, June of 25. And then during that time, there was a pause with basically the whole program with the new administration coming in January of 25. Because of our ability to keep going, we, with the funding we had essentially obligated for rounds one and rounds two, we were able to keep moving with those processes to bring companies that, we had selected under contract while we waited for clarity on what would be happening with the rest of the funding. So Michigan's about 110 million. We had obligated about half of it for rounds one and rounds two before the pause, let's say. And then once we got that clarity from the federal government in August of 2025, we were then able to proceed with our round three. And we are We had put out our RFP for round 3 of the rest of, like, let's say about 51 million in June of this year, 2026. And we'll be expecting proposals in August, and we'll make selections from there. So all told, we will probably be selecting anywhere between 100 and 150 sites between all 3 rounds. And with the, let's say, initial selections we made are, we've got 7 operational stations. We've got another 7 in construction, another 20 some in design, and another 30 or so waiting to get under contract for the rounds 1 and 2. And then we'll be making probably about 60 selections for round 3. So I'd kind of a overview of, from kind of the beginning to kind of where we're at now of our progress in the program over the last 3 years.
So that's a really good rundown. And because of your background, now you're heading up the Office of Major Projects, but for a while you were working in innovative contracting and kind of overlapping with your time as the project manager for the NEVI program. Why does design, bid, build, maintain make a lot of sense for this in particular? Because I know we use it on some road and bridge projects, but it's not right for everything. But talk about why it makes sense here.
Yeah, great question. So, in our innovative contracting area, we do what we call innovative or alternative delivery, where we use a design build or a progressive design build or a CMGC, a contractor manager general contractor type contract. In this case for NEVI, because of that legal requirement for the operations and maintenance phase, it set it up, well for this, design, build, operate, maintain contract type, which is, kind of thought of as like a P3 or a public-private partnership. And, the onus is on them to, we're not designing their sites. These are their, locations that they've identified and working with a site host. It's their EVSE or electric vehicle charging equipment that is that they're using. So we're not telling them what type of equipment to use. We're not telling them how to design their site. We give them basically the guidelines around ADA requirements and things like that, power requirements, uptime requirements, and then they have to, basically design that site to meet the requirements, and then they install the site. There's some oversight that we do, some testing and whatnot, but and then the payment process is set up such that they don't get full payment until they meet all the term or all the conditions of the 5-year term of operations and maintenance. So every year they'll get like a 4% payment if they meet the 97% uptime requirement. So it's a good contract type to ensure that they are meeting the requirements through the payment milestone process.
And you're kind of dealing with a chicken and the egg situation when it comes to electric vehicles, right? We know that lots of people say, I want to buy an electric vehicle, but I'm not sure that the charging network exists. And then other people will say, the charging network won't come until more people buy EVs. So this is what you've been battling since the start. You mentioned the change in administrations that created some uncertainty. But initially, when people hear there's going to be that much money on the street, they hear there's a big federal grant, there's a lot of interest. And you have to kind of balance between those that are just very ambitious and are chasing dollars and those that really can get it done, right? So talk about how you juggle that.
Yeah. Another great question. So, there's a number of established companies in this space, in this industry, and there's, of course, ones that are trying to break in. And the whole industry is really fairly new relative to, like, our standard road and bridge industry, let's say. And so through our evaluation process, there's like some pass-fail requirements that they have to demonstrate that they have, certified people that can install these things, that they have a professional engineer that will design the site on the civil side, and they have to demonstrate experience with installing for their installer. Let's say they have to have done so many of these installations in order to prove to us that they are worthy of being selected. So our selection process, I believe, is pretty rigorous, and so that we can weed out the companies that aren't serious or maybe we wouldn't feel be successful with this program. And so we've been very careful about how we score the proposals, how we select, what are those requirements we're asking for. When we put out the proposal itself is what's called the instructions to proposers, which is what we label the ITP, and then the contract. And we tell them, read the contract. And we get information. We understand from their narratives in their proposal that if they understand what the terms of the contract is, and it's lengthy, it's it's 200 and some pages. So there's a lot of information there, a lot of things that they have to do in order to get this funding through through their installation of their site. And so we've been, I think, fairly successful. We haven't. We've had some, companies that after selection, but before contracting, decided, okay, we can't keep moving forward. I would say the industry, because it's still fairly new, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say chaos, but it might be a synonym to that, it's been a little bit difficult. It's not like working with our standard road and bridge contractors, which, they know the contract, they know what to do. Of course, we oversee it and all that, but these companies are, some are, fairly new. They don't understand contracting with either the state or federal government. A big learning curve for a lot of them, like, around, okay, we require a bond, we require insurances. That's been a major hurdle with a lot of these companies. So, learning both ways, trying to understand better, how they're able to meet the contract requirements, and then for them to try to understand how they contract with us and what our needs are in order to get there. So it's been it's been interesting to kind of to be in this, kind of different thing that we're doing here at MDOT, but at the same time, really rewarding once we start seeing those sites in the ground and start seeing them used by the public.
We'll have more on the other side of this important message.
The Michigan Department of Transportation reminds you to slow down, follow all signs, and pay attention when driving through work zones, because all employees deserve a safe place to work. Work zone safety. We're all in this together.
Well, you mentioned that workforce component, and I think that goes back to that uncertainty again. It's like, do community colleges invest in a program that's going to be able to train these people so they have the workers out there? And if they have to pause because of a change in administration or other things, then they don't have the workforce. So are you hearing more that that talent is being developed and that these companies are able to get the people to do the installations and the maintenance?
Yeah, I think I'd have to look back, but I know the state of Michigan had, I think, a grant for something for, to stand up a program so, people get certified in the installation process, that EVSE certification, if you will. And so I know there's been, a focus on that to try to create the workforce that can do this. I don't know if we've seen so much, let's say with the companies that are subcontracted as the installers. It seems like they have adequate resources to do that. I haven't heard that they're can't find people to do this. So I think that's a good sign that they're finding people who are wanting to work in that space and do these installations. So of course as adoption continues to happen and more infrastructure kind of comes, that demand could continue to grow. So we'll see. But yeah, I think so far it seems like there's been at least within Michigan that there's been an emphasis on trying to create the workforce there, and that's been a good thing.
In your best case scenario, how long will it be until we've really built out what we can do with the existing program?
Yeah, I think it doesn't move as fast as anybody would like or what we would like. We're constantly trying to think of ways and I was just in a meeting earlier this morning about how can we try to motivate these companies to move faster. There's the contract requirements, but even just getting to the contract, that's taken in some cases a very, very long time, way longer than our standard processes, which is 49 days or something like that.
You mean because of the back and forth that goes on?
Yeah. Exactly, because of the biggest thing is them getting bonds. They have to get a bond. That's not something they normally have done, or insurance that meets our requirements. So that's been a big sticking point. we've changed our bonding requirements to make it a little bit more palatable. We've met with bonding companies. We've met with, like a bonding association group for the industry. We've talked through all the ways we could make this happen, and changed our requirements to try to reflect what they can actually do. So we've done a lot of that. So yeah, we're always trying to find ways to move this faster, and with the round 3 selections this year, we'll hope to get them under contract by next year, and then they'll have 2 years to construct at that point. So, I would say we'll probably be actively installing these chargers probably into 2030, if you had to ask me right now. So it'll be another 3-4 years before I think we would say that, okay, we've exhausted all the selections, in terms of getting them in the ground, and and then starts that that 5-year O&M period.
So I asked you this before, I think a couple of years ago when we talked about it, whether a career engineer who was doing a lot of different things 25, 30 years ago ever saw himself doing this, and what do you think about that now in retrospect that you've had more time in the program?
Yeah, right. I mean, exactly. 30 years ago when I started with the department, it was, I never would envision like we would be talking about, installing, EV chargers, and, it's kind of amazing actually. And, and just, I guess probably just in general, all the, the technology, and, just seeing kind of the change from the time, back when we were younger, right? And I was just having this conversation around just like personal computers, like, that really wasn't a thing when we were younger. And now, we have a device in our hand that's, 100 times more powerful than anything that we probably worked with back early on. So, just to kind of see advancement in technology, and even in the EV space, just the pace at which things are happening, relative to like battery technology, for example. I read a lot on, solid state batteries, and, different type of chemicals used for batteries, and all that gearing towards faster charging and more range. And there's already things going into production that are, way better than kind of, let's say, first generation batteries. So it's come a long way and will continue to. And I think, personally, I think there will be, a tipping point where, that concern about range will no longer be there, or charging time. Even right now, outside of NEVI, just on the kind of, let's say, infrastructure that's coming even in the last year, there already is chargers within 50 miles. Like I have an EV. I drove up to Alpena recently, where I'm from, and I was amazed. I look at I've used the PlugShare app, which shows all the chargers, and has user-based input on there, and there was fast chargers along M65, along US 23, and in small towns, like really small towns. I was really surprised by that, to be honest. And maybe I should not be, just knowing, working in the space a little bit. But we've got there's some fast chargers in Alpena with one of the companies that actually we're working with, GPM, and so that's where I charged my vehicle, and I had no problem doing it. And it's not a NEVI charger, and we hope to have more NEVI chargers in Northeast Michigan too. But yeah, it was. I was pleasantly surprised about the availability charging in rural areas right now. So NEVI will help that even more. But yeah, that infrastructure is I think is there now. So if somebody wanted to make a trip, I don't think they should be able to worry too much about finding a place to charge.
Well, that's supported by Joanne Muller, who is the Axios mobility reporter, and she's written a lot about this. I consider her, kind of one of the experts on the topic, and she says the same thing, that it may not be happening as quickly as everybody hoped. There's a lot of, one step forward, 2 steps back, but it is getting there, and a lot of people have decided to go for hybrids in between, as an in-between step, so that they can then maybe transition to a full EV when they feel more comfortable with the charging status. What do you hear anecdotally when you talk to friends or family about what you do? Because this is still a topic that divides people. There's a lot of misunderstanding about it out there. And do you feel like you have to advocate for it, or you try to give just the facts and stick to that?
I probably try to just stick to the facts, and I know there's folks that I'm very like, well, I'll never get an EV, but I'm actually again kind of maybe pleasantly surprised. how maybe open some people are. And when I'd be up to Alpena, of course, my older family members that we were meeting with for the 4th of July or having a luncheon with, I was talking all about, EVs and availability of charging and and the
Really?
ease of use and all that. And, they wanted to know more, and, kind of told them, how my experience has been as an EV owner, and just the benefits of that. And of course, some challenges too, like you do have to do a little planning if you are going to take a longer trip and look ahead. And but with the infrastructure that's there, it's not that hard. And so I don't know if I had any converts there, but yeah, I know when I read about things in the news and different sources of information, like different surveys have shown that I think more than 90% of EV owners would get another EV. And to me, that's saying, okay, they see this as something that, makes sense for them. And I totally would too. And the folks that I know that have EVs are, say the same thing. So, they don't, necessarily see any, challenges. There's a lot of benefits to it. And the infrastructure is just, becoming more and more to make things a bit easier. But really, for us, my home, 98% of our trips are, within so many miles that we just charge at home. So it's really not really a concern, other than when we do take a longer one, and that's every once in a while. But like I said, the infrastructure is getting there. NEVI's going to support that as we continue to stand up the program and get more chargers in the ground. It'll just be even more. So I think we're definitely at a different place than we were even 2 years ago. So I think hopefully folks can again, it's a choice. I'm not advocating that they do one thing or the other, but I think there's a lot of benefit to EVs, and just in terms of maintenance and other things. Just it's just easy.
Well, that goes to a related topic. As you know, we're in the midst of a road user charge pilot study. That's largely because of people switching to alternative fuel vehicles and the diminishing returns of the fuel tax. So I guess I'll ask you the next time you convene that family focus group in Alpena, see what they think about road user charges too.
Right. Yeah. I talked to them a lot about, in my previous roles in the department, one of my previous roles is system manager, dealing with the funding and making decisions on, fixes and how there is never enough funding. Right. So, yeah, I'm always, advocating about the need for more road funding in general, and just how we lag behind some of the other states in the Midwest, and that, to really, if we want to do the right fix at the right time, we need, more funding to do that. So, yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I appreciate it. I appreciate everything you and your team have done with this, and that you're kind of staying on it, even in a more expansive role that you have now with a lot going on. And maybe the next time we talk, we can talk more about the Major Projects Office and the things that you guys have in the works too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to give an update on NEVI and how we're proceeding with the program still, and we'll keep moving and trying to make it move a little bit faster.
All right, sounds great.
I'd like to thank you once more for tuning in to Talking Michigan Transportation. You can find show notes and more on Apple Podcasts or Buzzsprout. I also want to acknowledge the talented people who help make this a reality each week, starting with Randy Debler, who skillfully edits the audio, Jesse Ball, who proofs the content, and Jackie Salinas, who posts the podcast to various platforms and transcribes the audio to make it accessible to all.